we have two issues before us. One is the freedoms themselves, the values that I'm calling freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to bear, all the freedom to vote or whatever. The truth is, are those values themselves Torah values? That would be one issue. And people would say, no, there's censorship within Torah and stuff like that. But the fact is on the surface, religions do not necessarily hold of these freedoms. Because religions have very strict definitions of right and wrong, very strict definitions of what is correct or incorrect. So the first thing would come up is, does religion hold the freedoms? Especially if you look in terms of let's say, more Christian concepts in terms of divine right of kings and the idea of authority, which also will have to have a role within Jewish thought. It would seem that on the surface, the freedoms may not be a Torah value. So I quoted the Meshech Chachma last week that points out that the idea of the Meshech Chachma is Kol Eitz Hagan Ochel Tochel, that the truth is the Kodesh Baruch Hu gave us the world and basically said, I want you to benefit from the world. The Meshech Chachma's language, Mikol Eitz Hagan Ochel Tochel, from all the trees of the fruit you should eat from, he actually says Lahanasa, for your benefit, which seems to imply that man is given over a certain desire, and he's to follow through on that desire. And the truth is, this really develops from the concepts that really come up from Adam 1 in the famous article by Rosh Ber Soloveitchik, The Lonely Man of Faith, in the sense of Adam 1 is the individual who says, I want to develop, I want to go, I want to strengthen, I want to develop. In the sense that, as we say there, go forth and multiply, conquer the world. It really is an aspect of, this is your dominion. Take control of it. Build up on it. Which seems to be very much an idea of development of humanity, which can come down to personal development, nationalistic development, universal development, the idea of development of people following through on their desires. Our desires is very significant, especially if you look in terms of a capitalist system. The whole point of capitalism is based upon the aspect that we look at desires as good things. In other words, it's like a game. We're put into the game board, and we're wound up, and those wound up are desires. So the classic is you need those desires in order to get out there in the game. So the classic example is, and this gets into a whole issue with the Eitz Das Torah, which I've spoken about before. Another shiurim, guys in Kosher Tube can look it up on my Eitz Das Torah lectures, Tree of Knowledge of Good and Evil lectures. But the fact is you see this in terms of the fact that that if Kodesh Baruch Hu didn't give us the Yetzer Hara for sexuality, we would not have kids. Famous Gemara that the Chazal asked to take away the Yetzer Hara, and then all of a sudden there were no eggs. Because the fact is, you need a Yetzer Hara, you need some type of drive to keep you going. So the fact is, Kodesh Baruch Hu put those drives into us. So the truth is being allowed to have those drives flourish is an aspect that's of value. So really the freedoms is let the drives flourish. So the Meshech Chachma is taking a step further from the pasuk and saying, before you even had the restriction of don't eat from the Eitz Das Torah, there was the statement beforehand, which he understood as almost a positive command. He actually calls it an essay, Mikol Eitz Hagan Ochel Tochel, because of the repetition of the verb. Because usually you find repetition of the verb usually represents, or often represents, a chiyuv. So the truth is that there could be a value in the freedoms. That's one of the things I tried to develop from last week. The point is there's another aspect to those drives, another aspect to the freedoms in North American society. In fact, is these freedoms are given value, and part of those freedoms is the aspect of tolerance. There's always a restriction on every freedom, even with the most libertarian understanding of freedom. Right? There's a limitation. You can't murder someone. Right? There's a certain draw the line in the sand. You can't do everything you want to do. The most you can do is expand it as much as possible, but there's a certain line drawn in the sand that says no, ad kan. The question is, where do you draw that line? So that gets into the issue of tolerance, where different people draw the line at different places. Now, how do you respect or how do you relate to someone drawing the line at a different place? And that comes out from some type of authority concept. In other words, where do you get this idea that the line should be drawn there? Where do you get the values that draw the line? Okay? And it's not always so simple to say, well, the most natural thing of saying is natural morality. We all have a natural sense of natural morality, so therefore you may get it from the natural morality aspect, which a lot of people turn to, that we all have a sort of sense. And the fact is, this develops out of the age of reason, the categorical imperative of Kant and stuff like that. But the fact is that understanding of natural morality, Kant's understanding, is very non-tolerant. He says where we draw the line of authority is here, and he believed that to be across the board universal. All human beings would have drawing the line at this point in time, and therefore he can see that as an authority. That perception lets people understand that everyone really knows right and wrong. If you know you're doing something wrong, you don't do it. So you go up to someone who's doing a crime, and you sort of catch him, and then afterwards he feels bad about it, but he sort of knows he does something wrong. So that makes us feel, oh, you sort of know that it's wrong. But the fact is that we have a lot of issues about that today. We don't necessarily know what's right and wrong. The fact is we have disagreements over what's right and wrong. We also have to throw in a revelation, where God tells us what's right and wrong. In fact, nowadays, there's the fact that we have the concepts of relative morality, and the truth is as we see that not everyone shares the same sense of right and wrong, we now get this idea that the only way we can really know right and wrong is because God tells us. Revelational right and wrong. If God doesn't tell us revelational right and wrong, we wouldn't know it. Okay? So, for example, when the communist governments of some communists came in and took all the property of the bourgeoisie, right? Whether it was the Soviet Union, whether it was in China, wherever they came in and took all the property, was that theft or was that not theft? So they said, no, it wasn't theft, because those people shouldn't have had that property in the first place. The point is that do you think they knew it was wrong or not wrong? So the fact is, a lot of people feel, no, they really knew it was wrong, but that's what makes them evil, because they really knew it was wrong. But a lot of these people really thought they were doing this right. They really thought the bourgeoisie did effectively steal the money, from the property from the proletariat. So the truth is, it's not always so simple to define right and wrong just based upon natural morality.
Is it so simple in a religious sense?
Well, the religious sense also has something else which we'll have to get into, in the sense that in the Torah perspective, where you have a concept of elu ve'elu and different disagreements of thought, you have issues of why isn't it so clear-cut in the Torah perspective. That will be something we have to deal with. But the first thing we have to do is recognize on this level that there's this issue of what we should do, and this issue of tolerance, and the tolerance is basically effectively arguing for a tolerance of another person's belief in right and wrong, which questions the whole idea of the categorical imperative and questions the whole idea of whether we can actually define right and wrong. Which is something like, for example, I heard Rick Santorum say, I saw a clip, I don't know the full nature of what he said, but I heard Rick Santorum, the U.S. presidential election, says he believes in right and wrong. And he's going to call something right and wrong, and he's going to say when something's wrong. He misses the point. Those people he disagrees with may have the exact same attitude of right and wrong. Attitude towards right and wrong.
But they draw the line differently. Right.
They have a different definition. So you take in terms of example ideas of gay rights. So Rick Santorum will say, I don't know, but I would think he might, as other fundamentalists, though Santorum's a Catholic, but fundamentalists, homosexuality is wrong. It's wrong. The fact is that to the gays, right, and it's interesting how they find it, is that not allowing same-sex marriages is wrong. That's the term, the homophobia. They're defining right and wrong differently. And the question that exists is, how do you deal with tolerance? And the issue of freedom of religion is the freedom to define your own definition of right and wrong. That's really what's saying. We're saying that we don't know what the authority really says, and therefore we have to give freedom of people to say what says. That's the way freedom of religion comes down in our world today. So one thing is the idea of the freedoms, your autonomy, your own decision making, the fact that you be allowed, and then this idea of tolerance, which allows for me to call upon me to respect the fact that your decision of right and wrong may be different than mine, and to be tolerant in terms of how far I'll let that decision go, and how far I'll let you abide what you think is right, even though I think it's wrong. So in times of prohibition, Jews were able to have wine to make Kiddush, because even though most of society said that alcohol was wrong, I have to respect your freedom idea to say alcohol is right. And
that context is okay.
Within that context, but the fact is how do we do that? The question is, it's not so simple to define right and wrong. It's not so simple to define right and wrong. Okay, but I say it's not just not so simple to define right and wrong. It's not so simple to define or to explain how we justify or understand why we respect your disagreement over right and wrong. If I really hold this is right, and you really hold it's wrong, what's this idea that allows me to accept your viewpoint of it being wrong, or the other way around? If I really hold it's right, I really hold it's wrong, and you really hold it's right, what allows me to allow you to maintain this behavior which is right, which you consider to be right, even though I consider it to be wrong? Okay, and it's not so simple. In other words, if you believe it's right to have
before to get a double portion.
Let's try and give an example. You believe it's right to marry off your daughters in polygamy, but not only polygamy, that the father can marry off his daughters to whoever he wants, and then once she's married, the husband has sexual rights to the daughter. So effectively, I'm not saying this is true in any society. I'm just saying effectively, I'm sure that it basically says we're accepting a right of quote unquote rape of a husband on a wife, and the fact is, I would say in our society that would not be accepted. That would not be accepted. The point is that they would say,
unless you say this was a marriage, and since this is what married people do, it's not rape.
Yeah, but that was a law 20, 30 years ago. That I know in Canada, rape was not, if a husband could not legally rape his wife. That was a law in Canada 30 years ago, or 40 years ago, 30, 40 years ago. But the fact is that's been changed. But the point is that in that regard, you have a, thank you. In that regard, you have this issue of always got to be a nurse. Just there. Okay. So the fact is that if you had a philosophy, then I would allow you to abide by a behavior which I consider to be wrong. So the truth is that to some extent I may allow, to some extent I won't. In our society, the example I gave, I don't think we would allow. Not only not allow polygamy, I don't think we would allow if a person said, and I'm allowed to, according to my religion, to sleep with my wife whenever I wanted, and her viewpoint is irrelevant. I would say we would not accept that either. But the point is, at some point in time, we do allow this freedom of religion, even though we think people are doing something that's wrong. So, for example, if a person says, I don't want to have a blood transfusion, we would have to say, okay, that's your decision. Even though I think you're an idiot for doing it, that's your decision. It's interesting because the dividing line is usually hurting others in our society, or the classical in terms of alcohol. During the Prohibition, we think alcohol is terrible, but your religion says you have to have alcohol, so we'll let you have alcohol. But the thing is that what does the Torah say? The point is, what's the basis of it? The basis of that from the secular world is the fact that there's a question on whose authority runs. Now, under the Rage of Reason, there was a tremendous amount of strength for natural morality that came out of reason. The attack of the existentialists over the last 200 years was basically led us to relative morality. So now we have this idea that there's something wrong, there's a thing where, okay, we should be allowed to do whatever we want. There's this other thing that this authority, i.e. morality, is telling us that there's some parameter on it. But then, how do we know this authority tells us parameter on it? Well, it's relative, and the truth is that basically the argument is we don't know. Secular society is, you're right, we don't know. So they come up with a pragmatic decision.
You don't know either.
Right, exactly. That's it. So the basis of freedom of religion in many ways in our society is that I don't really know for sure, you don't really know for sure, so there's an aspect of relative morality. And that's really what explains a lot of the attitude towards religion. Religion is then thought of our society as a methodology of how you want to have your spiritual fix. But basically, when religion stands up there and says, and you see this, religion comes out, the Catholic Church comes out and says abortion is wrong. Yeah, okay, abortion, but no one really sees that, but that's as a real authority. It's sort of like most people abide by it and so forth and so forth. But the truth is that the idea of religion, of saying, see, what happens in religion is it's very easy for me to accept freedom of religion. Is basically, you want to do your spiritual fix one way, I want to do it another way. And I remember once when I had I was sort of story where a close friend of mine, Rav, was the Hills director at U of T. And he was being bugged by one of the theological colleges at U of T to have a discussion between one of the professors and a rabbi. Okay, for theology students interested in Jews would come to it. My friend really didn't want to do it, but he was being bugged by him, so he asked me if I would do it. So I remember being in this room, and I heard they were a little disappointed because no Jews came in the audience, but for the theological students there, right, and there was a professor of Bible, and there was myself, and we were talking about the tree of knowledge of good and evil. I've told this story many times before, so you might have heard it already. So the fact is that two things always hit me about that story. I remember talking to the guy who actually arranged the whole event, and I remember saying to him, you do recognize the word sin is not found in the story of the tree of knowledge of good and evil at all. The first time you come across the word sin in the Bible is in terms of Cain and Abel. And like this guy, like, what? The word sin is not in the tree of knowledge, like, what? Right? And then he looked at the professor and said, is that true, sir? And the guy said, yes, of course so. The idea of the sin is a Pauline understanding of the text, but the text doesn't say the word sin whatsoever. I felt like I just pulled the rug underneath this guy's whole religion. Because like so shocked that the word sin wasn't found in the Bible. Anyways, that was one thing I remember. The other thing I remember is at the end what they gave me. Okay, this was a nice theological group, so I wasn't expecting a check. I understood that, but they want to give me a present at the end. So what they gave me was a interfaith calendar. Okay, so they gave me a calendar. It was a nice calendar, but basically, it was the same picture 12 times. What was the picture? It was husband and wife with the family, all dressed nicely with that family morality type of look. Everyone's smiling, and the mother and the father are looking with their kids, and so forth and so forth. That was basically the picture. But what was around it was the context. So the Christian one had a Christmas tree. The Buddhist one had some little Buddhas. The Jewish one had the mother lighting Shabbos candles. To this day, I have never seen that picture in a frum Jewish home of a mother and a father and the children all dressed for Shabbos, smiling nicely at halakas nerus while the mother makes the bracha. Lo chaya v'lo yiyah, right? The fact is that all I know is that in my home, the way it is, it's time to bench left. Okay, but I'm not being Makabel Shabbos now. Okay, but okay. That's the normal home, but it was basically the same thing: mother, father, family values, and stuff. But that's what religion is today.
In the Reform home, I don't know. They don't worry about some of these things.
No, but in the Reform temple, you'll see it because they'll light candles 8 o'clock right before the table.
They don't light it at home then.
No, they eat Shabbos at home,
yeah.
but on the Shabbos table, before they eat the Friday night meal, they light candles. But it doesn't matter if it's dark or not outside. The candles are part of the Sabbath.
But the father and the kids could be looking on. I'm just
That's true. That's true. But that's why I said a from home. But the fact is that but the point is religion is family values, and then you have your little motifs of how you do it. I remember one time a girl I was teaching in afternoon Hebrew high school came over to me and said, "Come on, what's the real difference between Jews and non-Jews? So we have a family meal around the Seder, they have a family meal around Easter dinner. What's the difference?" And that attitude is really what supports freedom of religion. We're all trying to do the same thing, just what motif. So we get over it. And by the way, that's really an attitude from liberal Judaism, right? Which Reform Judaism, liberal Judaism, I'm using the term liberal Judaism because I saw this in a pamphlet from liberal Judaism in England, which basically said, what's the difference between liberal Judaism and Unitarianism? And they said nothing. Just what motifs we wish to use for our spiritual objectives. Liberal Judaism likes using Jewish motifs, and Unitarian Christianity likes using Christian motifs. Beliefs are exactly the same. Basically, that leads to a benefit to more freedom of religion, because basically, religion is not really imposing authoritarian values. I remember once there was a guy, a kid. When I was working in Denver, Colorado, I started an NCSY chapter, and what I arranged with the kids is that once a month on Sundays, or once every 2 weeks, I can't remember, we'd have a we'd have a breakfast, and we'd be able to talk ethical issues. Ethical issues. Euthanasia, abortion, like ethical issues. And one of the kids who came from a pretty frum home, a pretty traditional, I would say more than traditional, not maybe 100%, dot the halacha, dot the I, cross the T halachic, but pretty traditional. And he basically looked at me and said, "What are you talking about? What are we talking about this for?" And he basically says, "I always thought that Shabbos, that halachos, Shabbos and kashrus, I thought to our ethical values we were supposed to live to our own conscience. So that's not the way Torah works." And he didn't even know about the fact that there's a Torah on what is moral. There's a Torah on abortion, euthanasia, on ethical issues. So the point is that type of freedom of religion, which basically leads your conscience, the way that most people even talk about it. Like today, someone said that, I heard on CNN, that 80% of Americans feel that a pastor has no business telling his flock or her flock who should they vote for, who they should vote for. It's a matter of personal conscience. The problem is wait a second. That's very much what you expect from your pastor, to be told about what is the religion statement about these ethics. And you would expect, as a religious person, to have your religious advisor to tell you, listen, based upon my knowledge of the religion, this is what I think is correct. Okay, and the reason he's your pastor is because you accept his viewpoints on the religion. The religion does speak to morality. So the question is authority. So in our world today, basically freedom of religion is built upon the fact that we challenge the whole idea of really knowing about the authority. A lot of ways we got the freedom of religion because we really don't believe anyone can really know what God says or what really is the truth. That's basically the attitude, like, who says you're right?
Within Judaism?
No, in general, that's what freedom of religion comes from. The question is once you get into a system that believes there is a truth, such as the Torah system, can the Torah have any recognition of freedom of religion? So the fact is that this is based upon a Gemara in Shabbos, and it really comes from a Rashi there. Rashi says that he finds somebody, he says the person is not a kofir, he says, finding a certain person, he says he's not a kofir, he's just low mammon, he just doesn't believe. And really what Rashi is saying over there, from my understanding, the cases like this, well, I'll get to that in a second. What he's really saying is something where there is two aspects to knowing the truth. One is that the truth is knowable, which is what's challenged in our modern day philosophy. The second one is the ability for me to know the truth. Can I know the truth? And there's a tremendous amount of sources within Torah that understands that gaining knowledge of the truth is a very complex demand that Kodesh Baruch Hu places upon us. And therefore, we have an understanding that knowing the truth is challenging. It's not so simple. And therefore, in a certain way, we recognize the possibility of an individual with all good intent still not gaining an understanding of the truth. And on that level, we respect it. Now, in that regard, we may have two aspects of this. One is pragmatic, and that is let's say a person thinks it's okay to kill. So, a person has an argument, it's okay to kill. We may still want to take action against them because our society can't let him stand killing. So there's aspects in Torah that basically says there are actions we have to take towards an individual, not because we believe the individual is a rasha, not because we believe the individual is culpable for his actions, but because those actions cannot be allowed to continue. That's one side. And there's a whole concept in Torah that says that for social action, you can take action against someone even if you can't define the person as culpable theologically. Now, what does that mean? It means that there's another aspect, and that is a person possibly defined as a rasha. A rasha is someone who is theologically defined as defying God, knowing this is right and saying, I don't want to do what's right. Okay? Point blank. Classic idea of a rasha. And our idea of a rasha is it's important that the person knows what's right and wrong, and chooses to do what's wrong. Doesn't think that what's wrong is right. That puts him in the second category. Okay? And where do we learn that out from? We learn it out from Hasra. The concept that before anyone can get punished in the Jewish courts, he has to have Hasra. He has to be warned that this action that he's about to do is contrary to Torah law. Okay?
Believe that really could such a person who might be defined as a rasha, but really believe for some reason it doesn't make any sense, or for such and such a reason?
That person would say, I don't believe God told me to do that. Once a person doesn't say that, that's something different. But once a person says, I know God told me not to do this, and I'm going to do it anyways.
Is it a function of somebody verbalizing it?
Yes.
Or as opposed to by their action?
Okay, so the fact is, in the laws of Hasra, you have to have a warning right before the act, and you have to Kabbalah right there. There's a Rosh, I think it's a Rosh, in... oh boy, I have it somewhere in my notes. There's a Rosh in... maybe. But the Rosh makes a very important statement. The Rosh says that the reason someone is executed for Chilul Shabbos is not because of the act of Chilul Shabbos. It's because the guy is lahachis. He's challenging God. It's because the only way you can get a punishment in the courts for Chilul Shabbos is not by doing the act. If you're just doing it l'tayavo, if you have your Big Mac and you just want to eat that Big Mac, right? Right? You can do it in front of wherever you want. No, person yells at you, it's awesome in the Torah for you to eat a Big Mac. Just don't open your mouth. Right? Okay, or open your mouth to eat the Big Mac, but don't open your mouth to say, I know God said not to do it, I'm still going to eat it. Because that way you put it for makas. You can't get punished. The only way you can get punished in Jewish law is by first saying, I know God said not to do this, and therefore I'm going to do it. Now, the Rambam makes the point.
Pragmatically, though, maybe I'm speaking as a modern day individual.
Right.
Why would I set myself
Exactly. That's exactly what the Rosh says. The Rosh says, when we read in the Gemara that it will be impossible that we never executed someone, and so forth and so forth. The truth of the matter is, unless someone's an idiot, right, either the person's a total idiot, right, or he's a real Russian. He's basically saying, I don't care about God. I could think of much stronger language. I'm eating the Big Mac. So the point is, what the Rosh is saying is, the reason the person was punished was not because he ate the Big Mac, but because he defied God. Because he said, I don't care what God says. Now, we think about this. Who would do that? If someone says to you, hey, God told you don't eat the Big Mac, you would look at it and say, oh, I don't believe God told me not to eat the Big Mac. So you're punished for makas. You can't get punished because you don't believe. Hasra is that the only way you can get punished in Jewish law if you accept that this is the law. And you have to make a verbal statement of acceptance. Now, there is one exception to it. The person is a Talmid Chacham. He's the one exception is noted that he already knows the law. So, but the fact is, if a person says, I don't believe this, that person is patur from punishment in Jewish law, except for social order, law and order. The Rambam brings down Hilchos Roseach and other places that ignorance of the law can't be an excuse if it's necessary for law and order. Ignorance of the law is generally an excuse for everything else. However, when there's law and order involved, there is another court system, whether it's a secondary court system in the courts or whether it's called the Beis Din HaMelech, the court system under the king's authority, that basically says that you are entitled to that we will enforce upon you the laws of society to maintain society. So Rabbi makes a point of this. He says specifically that only applies to murder and theft and things that are necessary for society. But even avodah zarah, person is avodah zarah says I don't believe and bows down to the divorce, even though that's the worst crime there is. Person can get away without being culpable. Shabbos same way. There is one exception the Gemara brings down. I don't know if the Rabbi brings it down there, but there is one exception the Gemara. The Gemara says if the person is encouraging others to do it and is breaking down the immoral fiber of the society, then you could take action and under emergency power. So there is.
He has to be warned not to.
No. If in that situation, so with avodah zarah, if you be punished under the formal court system, you have to be warned that you're not allowed to bow down to idols. And the guy says, I know God told me not to do this, I'm doing it anyways. Then you can get killed for avodah zarah. If you keep quiet, you're off the hook, because ignorance of the law is a defense in Jewish law. However, if you're doing it, and it's already permeating into society that you're doing it, and it's already becoming a wave in the society that people are doing it, then you can punish someone who without warning, and even if they don't believe, in order to maintain society. But what the interesting thing from our perspective is that here's a concept that says if you don't know this is true, you can't be punished, which implies that the knowledge of truth cannot be assumed. And we pass on to the individual. This is the basis of the Jewish concept of freedom of religion. And I do believe there is a Jewish concept of freedom of religion. It doesn't mean I have the freedom to do whatever I believe. What it believes is that within the concept of freedom of religion, the Jewish perspective is that there is a recognition that human beings, as they struggle to find the truth, will not always get it. And we have to respect the fact that people don't always get it. Now, does that mean that we're going to allow individuals to undermine our society because of that? No. So in Israel, we would not let in everyone being open to avodah zarah because we have a society we wish to maintain. A monotheistic society without idolatry. However, the person who happens to practice avodah zarah doesn't necessarily mean we're going to kill them. Doesn't necessarily mean we may not be happy to have the person live in our society, but we may not sit there and say you're going to hell. The point is that it depends on what we're society. But in Judaism, there's a recognition that there is that the knowledge of the truth is not so simple, and therefore the complexity of our existence, how we relate to people who have different ethical systems, doesn't emerge because of what I would call the secular understanding that the truth is not knowable. It comes from our recognition that it is not so simple for us to know the truth. And it's a challenge for us to know the truth, and that we may falter in our ability to know the truth. So therefore, if we see someone else practicing a different faith system, it would not be, it's true for you, this is true for me. We would sit there and say, from my perspective, right, I have to know that I have to think that that's wrong. But what right do I have to impose my perception on you, right? Because I recognize my own weaknesses and my ability to know, and you have to recognize, I have to recognize your weaknesses and ability to know. So if it's a different level of freedom of religion. It's a freedom of religion that basically doesn't say you can be a dogmatist. It's a freedom of religion that says that we will respect as you struggle to know the truth. One of the things I find in the Jewish concept of freedom of religion is that it really does not favor dogmatism, while the American concept of freedom of religion favors dogmatism. So, for example, in the American concept of free religion, if you show any wavering on your belief, any wavering on your belief, you basically, that's understood to be a challenge on freedom of religion. Well, if you really believed, you'd hold on to it. You have to be a dogmatist. So if you show any type of questioning, must mean you're not really devout. In the Torah view of freedom of religion, we would expect wavering. Not that, obviously, and we respect the fact to be challenged. There's a lot of, the fact that this leads to the fact that you look at all the Kedoshim who died al Kiddush Hashem, you have to understand that a lot of times, what really was going through their mind. The point is they still have to be, there's still a place where you're adamant in your belief system and so forth. It's not that wavering allows you to do everything, but there's a perception that I can tolerate wavering. I can understand it. So if and the truth is I know from my own perspective is that I usually have a problem with dogmatists because they don't waver. That the lack that they don't waver shows that they don't really have an understanding of the complexity of truth.
Well, maybe the truth is really very simple, and somebody, from the person who's a dogmatist, if he knows or thinks he knows, why should he waver?
Right. The Torah perspective raises a challenge to that. Doesn't mean it makes you weak. Doesn't mean it makes you weak, but it makes you understand the challenges that are involved.
That may well be. I think of myself often as a secularist. That's the way my thought process goes.
Okay.
And I think I've come across rabbis in my time who may be like very the dogma. I know this is the law, but because our previous generation said something like that, the Gedolin has said such and such. They don't seem to be wavering. Man, I can wonder how come, or I also have great problems with Elei Divrei Elokim Chaim. How many truths are there?
The fact is what I'm introducing. What you're introducing is a much more complex issue, but how you balance the fact that the people who had Elu ve'elu were still adamant in their position. So those people who fought Hillel and Shammai, they were still adamant that they were right. So it wasn't in the battle of they were right that they basically said it wasn't like a weakness per se. It was, but on the other hand, Elu ve'elu is different than what I'm describing here. Elu ve'elu is a much broader understanding of the truth. It's a matter of differing opinions within the truth, which is a different issue. What I'm talking about here is what you talk about is concept of Tinnik Nishma, that the person who's been captured and not brought up Jewish, and so forth and so forth. We basically are saying the fact that they weren't taught, they were taught a different system, that's why they don't understand. Or a person, the Chazon Ish says, the fact that nowadays the fact that we don't have open miracles means that no one can ever be a real apikaros today, because there's no adamant proof. The point is does that take away from my accepting what I believe? Yes and no. The truth of the matter is that in a certain way you have to have the strength in making your decisions, and you have to abide by your decisions. And the fact is, the way I understand it is that you have to be honest to yourself about how you make your decisions. a certain understanding of Descartes in terms I think I am is basically is that whatever way I know who I am or what I am or my perception of truth, that's always something I have to go back to in terms of my my knowledge and so forth. But at the same point, though, I have to be adamant about it. At the same point in time, I have to respect the fact that the truth is a product of my ability to know the truth. And my ability to know the truth is the thing that I may be questioning. And therefore, before I'm going to label someone else as going to hell, I may have, and the truth is I might, if the guy says, hey, I know it's wrong, I'm still going to do it. But the fact is, before I label someone else as going to hell, I'll sit there and say, what does he believe? And do I really know that maybe what he believes is a product of what he really thinks is the truth, and he's gone through the same process that I'm going through, and so forth and so forth. In the end, if it's a social issue, I may have to say, listen, too bad, Osama bin Laden. Maybe the guy really had a belief in this. Maybe he really had a belief. Really thought he was doing the right thing. In the end, I'm sorry, he had to be taken out because he was dangerous. There's certain end. I'm not. No difference. I'm not going to say he's a rush or going to hell. But say, listen, that cheshbon is a cheshbon of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Kodesh Baruch Hu is the only one who knows how honest a person's being with his own systems and own knowledge and so forth and so forth. Okay, I'm not going to sit there and say that anyone who thinks anything is right is for sure okay also. Okay, there may be weaknesses in how you think things through and so forth. The point is I can take positions socially, for law and order. However, in terms of relating to other people, there's a certain adkan. Listen, you can't mess up my society, but on the other hand, if I want to get to the situation of defining you as evil, that defines me first of all as you recognizing the evil and then acting with the evil. The point is, if you don't think it's evil, I'm not going to get into the analysis of a Kodesh Baruch Hu of whether you should have known it's evil or not. All I'm going to say is that to a certain extent, I'm not going to judge you on that level. So therefore, if you are...
in no case can you judge?
No, you can judge when it's a law and order situation. You can judge in a law and order situation.
That somebody's done an evil thing.
The person thinks it's okay. That's your definition of evil.
Hitler thought what he was doing.
So that's exactly.
Doesn't make it okay.
No, it does not make it okay. It does not make it okay. But let's use Hitler as an example. Okay, it's all of us would like to think that Hitler is suffering in Gehenna. Okay, I have no idea because I didn't even know if Hitler had Bechira. If Hitler didn't have Bechira, then the Rambam says the only reason you get Gehenna is because of Bechira. If he was created without Bechira to act this way, I don't know. So he was created with that.
We have no reason to believe that.
That's not so simple. That's really not so simple. No, it's really not.
It's the exception.
It might be the exception, but the fact is, once you get to a position of power, it seems not to be so much the exception. Because the fact is that one of the answers they give by Pharaoh is the reason I know Bechira is because he was already the king of.
He did have Bechira up until a point.
The fact is that other people say not so simply like that. That the Bechira, the absence of Bechira by Pharaoh is a product of him being a melech. Now, you see, the fact we're having this argument is exactly the point. I'm not trying to justify Hitler. I'm not trying to in any way. I have an idea that I like to think of Hitler.
You're saying that you cannot recognize evil in this world as evil.
No. Wait a sec. There's two forms of evil. There's the evil individual and there's evil actions. Evil actions I can recognize.
There's no person who considers himself to be an evil person.
Right, ain't on a muscle in Russia. Right, that's
There's nobody in prison who considers himself
exactly. So the truth is from a Jewish perspective, we can judge the action. Okay, in other words, if a person's a murderer, right, even though he thinks he was totally justified for doing it, he had a calling from God to do it, or he took out whatever it is.
Other person did something to him, which is very bad.
It just happened. Itamar.
What?
The family that was slaughtered, the 2 months child, stabbed to death many times.
Right. Right. Okay.
That person is
Right.
not an evil person.
Oh, so wait a second. Let me.
You're saying the act is evil, but the person.
Well, no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we can define the act as evil. Okay, what I'm saying is building up like this.
I would define the person as evil.
So wait a second. Wait a sec. The Jewish court basically says if you don't have warning, we're talking about the Jews, whatever, and it gets more complicated because you're now dealing with Ben Noach. But the fact is, in the Jewish court, right, if you don't have Hasra, you can't get punished. Okay?
You can by the king's court.
You can by the king's court, exactly. So the fact is, and the Rambam says, the king's court basically deals with the action. You can only do that in cases of law and order. So if someone's Oived Avodah Zarah, which is crime number one, the king's court can't take any action. I gave you one exception before. But the fact is, if a person steals, the king court can take action. This is not from the definition of rishus. It's from the definition of practicality. Person who's Oived Avodah Zarah did an act of Avodah Zarah. Okay, now, we can deal with the action. Now, in terms of defining him as evil, that's a much more complex situation. Part of it is a recognition that he's doing evil, his understanding of recognition, and his idea of defying God. What happens if he doesn't think he's defying God? Now,
if he's an atheist.
That doesn't mean...
If he's an atheist.
That doesn't mean... I'm trying to be clear about this. It doesn't mean that the person is not evil. All it means is I can't define him as evil. That's all I'm saying. Now, what I'm saying is that in my consciousness, I obviously think of Hitler as evil. That's not an issue for me. But the truth is to be able to define him absolute as evil, I can't do because I'm not God. And I don't know what happened in his mind, what his Bechira choices were, and what he even had as Bechira. That's the issue over here. It's not, and that's a very different issue.
How do you define that person? How do you define that person? Beinoni?
No, the truth of it is that you know something. The question is for what definition? See,
What is Russia?
So the question is, what do you need? What's the point of the definition? So the question is, for the definition, the question is why do I need to define him?
Why do you need to define him?
Yeah, to know how to respond to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to know how to view.
Absolutely, that's law and order.
You know, there is actually the Gemara allows in certain situations to hate a person.
Yes, right.
That has you don't actually have to be close to a person to hate them.
Right, but why? In order to know your behavior towards them. See, in other words, you have to know how to keep your distance to that person. I would not like Hitler. First of all, I don't think anyone should learn from Hitler. I for sure would not want his books around.
Learn what not to do.
Okay, or I would not want. The truth is, I want to keep a distance from him. All those things. What we're talking about is a very specific definition. You're talking about in terms of how I should behave as a human being in this world, and every way I agree with you. What I'm talking about is in the end, what it comes down to is actually.
If you hate a person.
Yeah.
It doesn't actually mean that you do anything to that person.
No, it means you change your consciousness that you don't want anything to do with this person's belief system or methodologies or the way he thinks. You are maintaining distance. Hate is I'm maintaining distance from that person. That's the whole point of hate.
I don't think
that's what hate is. Love is I want to be close to that person. Hate is I want to maintain a distance. I want not only for me to maintain a distance, I want other people to maintain a distance from them. Because what I'm doing is...
You're saying there's nothing visceral in hatred as defined of everything else.
I think
it's
people.
A very cold thing.
I don't think it's cold. I think it's supposed to develop the emotions. But what I'm doing now is I'm dissecting it. I'm dissecting it to explain how it works in our understanding that we can't. In other words, what I'm basically working with here.
I understand hatred and love as emotions.
Yeah, but what I'm doing with here is I'm dealing with, let's say, the idea of hasra. Let's go back to hasra. The idea that if a person eats a Big Mac without being told that it's wrong, even if he's told it's wrong, says, I didn't know, or just keeps his mouth shut, he's not punished. At the root, what the Rosh says is the only reason you punish someone within the formal court system is because you have absolute proof that he's being lahachis, that he's defying God. God said A, I'm saying B. Right? I'm not listening to God. That's the definition of rishus. Now, that's in terms of being able to make a judicial decision, to be able to say, you are a rasha. In the Jewish court, you had to have absolute proof that this guy was saying, I don't want to follow God, I'm acting against God's will. If he doesn't say that, he's smart, like the Rosh says. He's smart. He's going to eat that Big Mac and just love it. And he knows if he keeps his mouth shut, he's wily, he'll never get punished. Does that mean he's less of a rasha? No. The point is I can't clearly define him as a rasha. Does it mean in terms of sina? No. I want to stay far away from him. I may have very negative emotions towards him. But the point is that you break it down and understand that you can't really say 100% if that guy knew he was doing something wrong. And it's from that recognition that we see the starting points of the Jewish concept of freedom of religion. Not in terms of allowing every type of religion, not in terms of allowing every statement to exist. In the same way, in North America, we don't allow every religious belief to exist. But it comes from a very different statement. In North America, it comes from the idea that the truth can't be known. From our perspective, it comes from the fact that we understand that I cannot judge whether the person knows the truth and is defying it. And that's the issue over there. And therefore, what I'm getting at is that obviously there are very strong senses we're supposed to have a rishus. But even in terms of the Rambam, Tue Jun is in that category. The Rambam says that the people who are like the Rambam says the mitzvah l'psono, there's a mitzvah to hate the Russians. He says the only Russia was the first generation of Karaites. He says after that it's all Tue Jun because they were taught that way. So the truth is that my definition may challenge the first generation of Karaites as well. Okay, you're right. But the point is, the Rambam says after that, there's no mitzvah to hate them. The whole world today, people who are not from today, there's no concept of mitzvah l'sono because they're all Tue Jun, which basically means is they don't know any better. Which basically means that that the truth is not easy to comprehend. Now, I'm taking one step further. I'm sure there are people who are mamish r'shayim, who know that it's wrong and are still doing it. The problem is that how do I know that? How do I really know that? I know.
Tell you how you know.
Yeah.
I'll tell you how you know.
Yeah.
There are people who have had a detailed, formal Jewish education, understood well.
Right, wrong.
Right?
Yeah.
And then chose to teach a form of Judaism that is anathema.
Okay, so the truth.
They consciously did it.
Yeah, the truth is that you have to go back to it and say the issue.
Rob once said to me when I said, are you telling me that because the Rambam says those people who don't accept the idea of transmitting, they will not have a place in the world to come, that most of Yiddishkeit today will not have a place in the world to come because the majority of Jews don't? He said, no, heaven forbid. They don't know that. Their teachers do.
The fact is, though, is that what's interesting is those teachers, and that's where it gets difficult. But you see, the Rambam, there's a famous Rabbi that's cholek with the Rambam about whether God has a physical body or not. And the Rambam says the person who believed that God has a physical side to him is a min. Clearly, min, right? And it's one of those things that he says basically is one of those things that's also part of the Ikarim. So the Rabbi says, how can the Rambam say that? Yesh gedolim mimenu. There are people greater than us who believe God has a physical side to him. So how could the Rambam have said that? So what that does, a lot of people quote this Rabbi and so forth, but the point is that the question exists is that those people who disagree what was the disagreement? Did they quote sources? And the Rambam says, and they quoted because they quote psukim and midrashim to defend themselves. So the Rambam says you're quoting them wrong. They're all allegorical. Yad Hashem by Mitzrayim doesn't mean the actual hand of God. So, but I read it does. The thing is that what you're getting at is a very tough issue. That in other words, those people who originally moved away from Yahadus, can we clearly define what that evil was? And I looked at it like this, for example. I look at, let's say, Esav. Esav, he saw the angels in Avram's camp. Esav was taught by Yaakov Avinu, by Yitzchak, by Avram. He saw it. So when it says that Esav went out on 13 to go out, and he did the affairs he did, right, when he was 13, I'm totally mind-boggling. To know that God said not to do this, to know the consequences of not doing it, and to say, well, I'm still going to do it. Amalek saw the miracles in Egypt. They sit there and say, no, we're going to attack Klal Yisrael. You understand how stupid you are? Yeah, but we just want to hurt God. We just want to defy God. That's Rishus. Has nothing to do with the world nowadays. And people say, well, we have belief and not belief. The fact is, that's Rishus. There's no doubt that that's Rishus. And there's no doubt that on that level there's Rishus, and that Rishus exists. The question I'm asking is, can I define something having that Rishus? All the cases that you're mentioning, those individuals all thought that they were saying the truth. And they all quoted sources.
That's my point. That's my point. Is that because somebody feels they're saying the truth, and they're not.
Right.
That does not necessarily mean that they're not doing evil.
You're right. By the way, you're right.
Esau did evil.
You're right.
Choices.
You're right. But wait a sec. What I'm saying is,
and his evil is worse because his knowledge.
Okay, but my point is that I have to be clarified. I'm not saying those people did not do evil. I'm saying where the Jewish concept of freedom of religion emerges, it doesn't mean we accept freedom of religion from everyone. The question, what I'm saying is,
religion.
What?
Moloch, it's a religion.
The fact is that exactly in the Jewish concept of freedom of religion, there's a concept that you have to know the truth. If you don't know the truth, that becomes a mitigating circumstance. Not practically, you have to stop the practice anyways, in Moloch, for example. But the fact is to be able to say that this person's a Russia, that I can't say unless I have some reason to say, I know this person is saying, God said this. But the question is the difference between me knowing it. In other words, I'm not saying a person who I can't prove. There's a person who eats a Big Mac, right, but doesn't accept the Kabbalah Basra. He might be the biggest Russia in the world. Might be the biggest Russia in the world. Knowing he's not going to get punished, he might be the biggest Russia in the world, and is only eating that Big Mac lahachas to get back at God. The problem is I can't state totally and emphatically that he's a Russia, because maybe he doesn't know.
You know the proof.
Yeah.
That if somebody in the former Soviet Union did a counter-revolutionary activity, their penalty was to put them into an asylum.
Yes. Right.
Why? Right? And we actually have that today in a different form.
Yeah.
That nobody would do that unless they were insane.
Right.
Right. They didn't know right from wrong.
Right.
So we'll put them in an asylum and we'll fix them.
Right.
Right. You know, a person who murders a 2-month-old child by stabbing him to death, he couldn't have done it unless he's insane.
Right.
He couldn't have thought that was the right thing to do.
Right.
That, you know, that what that does is that mitigates all behavior.
Okay. The fact is that
evil in its sense.
Okay. The truth is that this is a tension.
You can judge certain things as evil.
You're right. This is a tension. The act can be evil. That's no question about it. I'm not going to sit there and say that the person's not evil. I'm not going to sit there and say, and there's certain consequences if you mitigate this in such a way that you let everything go. Right? Even with Teenage Nishmas, it should not let everything go. Right? I remember that one time there was a situation in a yeshiva where a guy went out with a girl. High school guy went out with a girl. And one of the Rabbi I was close to took the position the kid should be expelled from the yeshiva. And everyone was shocked. Because one of the Rabbi I was close to, obviously you should put two and two together, this person was not perceived to be a Kenai right-winger, right? Okay. But every other person in yeshiva said he should be suspended, other punishment. This one Rebbe said he should be expelled. And everyone was shocked because he was the most rational thing, So I went over to him. And I said, I went over to this friend and I said, what's shot? Expelled? You know what happened if you expel the guy from the yeshiva? Where would he end up? So the guy said, so he said something very powerful to me. He said, "It's him, it's the worst thing you can do. I'm moida. For him, it's the worst thing. But for the yeshiva, it's absolutely necessary in order to make it clear that this behavior is unacceptable." What he was saying is that whenever you figure out things, you have to balance society and individual and so forth and so forth. Not every decision that is made is perfect for the individual or perfect for the society. You have to balance these things out. Now, the fact is I'm not in any way trying to mitigate against a definition of rishus. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is from a Torah perspective, we recognize the challenges we feel in trying to comprehend something, trying to understand truth. Included in that truth is trying to understand or trying to know another individual. In the Torah perspective of rishus, it goes beyond eating a Big Mac. For a person to be a rush, it's not just the fact that he eats a Big Mac, it's got to be a reason why he eats a Big Mac. And we don't really know the person's reason. The only person who knows the reason, and the only being who knows the reason is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, how do I respond to it? I have responsibilities to respond. And that response could be, do I want my friends hanging out with? Do I want my kids associated with a person? Does this person be a member of the society? These are all legitimate issues. And I think there's also questions of how you should relate emotionally to that person. But the concept of freedom of religion, of tolerance within the Jewish perspective, emerges from the recognition of our own inabilities. Not to say that we're always wrong, not to say that sometimes we're right, not to say that our inabilities mean we don't have any abilities. We have abilities, but we're not God. And therefore, we can't say absolutely 100% what the truth is. In the relative morality of secular society, free religion emerges from the fact that the truth can't be known. From our society, it emerges from the fact that the truth is a challenge of knowledge. And therefore, there's a challenge in knowing whether someone really is 100% a Russia. We don't know. We really don't know. We're given some indications. I mean, you hear about Menashe Melech. The completely calls him Menashe. And not only that, Menashe supposedly did tshuva. Everyone says Menashe did tshuva. And then there's a machlokas, but the Mishnah says Menashe is one of the kings that doesn't have chelik olam haba. And yet he's known to have done tshuva. So the fact is, his rishus was so much that his tshuva didn't even help him get olam haba. That's where the one sheet. I think we basically hold that eventually he got olam haba. But do you understand that? I mean, the truth is, if you really understand, I mean, Acher was Elisha ben Abuya was a Russia. Yet for some reason, Chazal fought for him to get olam haba. It's such complexity in understanding this. The point is if you look at Elisha ben Abuya's situation, it's a perfect example of what you're saying, because the arguments given for what Elisha ben Abuya did wrong, or why Elisha ben Abuya went off the derech, seems to be psychological reasons, which seems to give some reason, well, it was a psychological problem. especially if you believe the way he was brought up, stuff like that. So the fact is that because you have a psychological issue, like insanity, that may not always be a defense against rishus in Judaism. The only thing I'm saying is we have to respond to the action. We have to respond to what's necessary for society. We have to respond to what's necessary for us to maintain our Torah ways. But to be able to say point blank, we're not the judge of another person. Yeah.
Playing my role of devil's advocate.
Well, you have to stand in line because he says he's playing his role of devil's advocate, but you've already played that role.
I have.
Well, okay.
No, I was the angel's advocate.
Right, right.
I'm the devil's advocate.
This is pretty my position, according to some viewpoints, yeah.
If somebody, if your point earlier was you couldn't know what was going exactly on in somebody's mind.
Yeah.
Can you envision? Let's assume, I will envision whether it's something like with sodium pentothal, whatever. You can somehow have some new discovery that will allow you to know better what's going on in somebody's mind.
Right.
If that occurred, would you feel sort of conceptually? Would you feel bound to?
No.
No, that's a good question. Would you feel bound, perhaps? Would you feel bound, perhaps, to say we couldn't? If your reason was we didn't know, and now we did know with enough 99.9 something %. I said, wait, so say if you could know. Or, for example, you might fall back. Well, this is the way the previous generations did it, and I can't go against that.
So the fact is, there's some legitimacy in the second thing you're saying. We have a concept in halacha. Even the Baskol came out and said, "Hey, you see that guy over there? He's eating a Big Mac. He knows it's wrong. He's just doing it to get back at me, Baskol, get back at God." Okay, the fact is maybe I might sit there and say, "Oh, that's something to keep in mind," but that would not be halachically necessary because the halacha has its own definitions. In terms of sodium pentothal, I don't know, but the fact is that the Rabbi has an idea, and something else in the halachic system, and maybe it's just the other side of the coin. He says, "Why do you follow a Navi who does miracles? Why do you follow a Navi who does miracles?" Right? This is a very powerful statement. He says, all the miracles in the world can never prove to you absolutely 100% that he's a Navi. Because it might be a trick. The question is, the halacha, when it says, if a person does this and this, it's not even miracles, and he predicts the future, and he's always right. That doesn't mean 100% he's a Navi. It doesn't mean that. What it means is you now have an obligation to listen to him. So all that happens is an interesting statement the Rambam is saying. We live in a world of practicality. We can only go upon the way we can make decisions. The Rambam, I think, is giving another example that our decisions, can we absolutely say 100% that our decisions are correct? No. In a lot of ways, no. But the Torah says in this case, in other words, we have a way of saying this is a Navi. Maybe not. However, the Torah says that if he meets this criteria, you can assume he's a Navi and you have to follow him. That's what the Torah says. It's an aspect of recognizing truth. And the truth is, when it comes down to is our own questioning of truth. See, this is not a good example of this. Is that, listen, I think, that anyone questioned the VM, they did these things, and they predict the future. There's no question that these guys were Navis. I mean, what are you talking about? But the point is that you as human beings always can doubt yourselves. And I think there's a value in always doubting yourself. Because I think there's a tremendous problem with the dogmatist. And I think that's when we talk about freedom of religion and Jewish perspective. It's not the American anything goes. But it is a recognition that we also don't favor the dogmatist.
Well, then let's see. How do we tolerate the dogmatists within the religion?
become a problem. And usually when dogmatists start taking over the religion, it usually gets to be absurdist. The zealots at the time of the second Korban were dogmatists, and that was a problem. Dogmatists always create problems.
If you preach that in Beit Shemesh, you get stoned. It's a disaster.
It's time not to be stoned and time to be stoned. What can I tell you?
It's great.
Speaking of stoned,
it's former time to be stoned.
That's what we're going to get to. So the truth is, next week I'm going to speak about, I want to do another interesting issue of values today, and that concerns alcohol and chemicals and how it affects Purim. Some very interesting ideas here about our society's understanding of even natural chemicals in the human body.